to them first, and then if they're no good, then you can click the button.
Yeah.
If they're good, then get it.
All right, I've resolved the YouTube problem. It was definitely a YouTube problem. All right, we're good to go. I have hit record.
Oh, 1 second.
Uh-oh. When it went well.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Looks good.
Well, because I touched the knob, so.
Yeah, it looks good enough on my side, too. It actually looks a little better than before, so I think you got it at a good level. Let me find this tweet, and I'll start us. Always got to find a tweet. Where is this tweet? It was my own tweet. I retweeted too many things today. There it is. There it is. All right. It's Monday, September 20th, 2021. I'm Rim.
I'm Scott.
And this is Geek Nights. Tonight we are talking about computer magazines and related ancient, obsolete things. So yesterday, it's Geek Nights. Often people make fun of us because it turns into Bike Nights, because in the beginning of the show we talk about what's going on in our lives, and especially during COVID, but for a long time before that, 90% of what happens in our lives that isn't part of Geek Nights that we would talk about is something to do with a bike. So
we should just make Bike Nights, like make a bike, put it in the bike category, and hope get bike sponsors.
We could replace our least popular day with bikes.
We'll interview bike people. Let's just do this, the thing that podcasts are supposed to do, which is just be, a media outlet that takes ads and gets sponsors and interviews people.
Oh, you mean the thing we avoided for so long? The reason why Geek Night stayed at this very specific plateau of engagement?
Yeah, right. Let's do the thing that you're just like a cookie cutter. What a podcast is supposed to do.
So if we wanted
just to get free bike shit, because right now it's hard to get bike shit.
I was about to say that is a good angle, because even with my contacts on the inside of some companies, nobody's sending me a 3080 right now.
we have no contacts in bike companies.
Yeah, but we could just make bike content. I think we could do. So my idea was to revitalize an idea that we brought off and on but never committed to, was having the Friday Geek Nights that is not regular, but whenever there's a Friday Geek Nights, it's some special episode that we made, like other topic, something that took research, an interview that was big, like a guest host. We could bring that back and then occasionally do a Friday Bike Nights.
I only think the way I'm only doing that. I would only suggest that, I wouldn't even relate it to Geek Nights. It would just be like, the bike podcast with, whatever.
Well, the other way to go with our new website is to do the thing that our current website supports, but we've never used, of having multiple shows.
Sure, but we don't have to integrate it with our current website. We just make a brand new thing just to get free bike shit.
Oh yeah, I just want it to be in the same CMS because I'm lazy, and also I would interlink the branding a bit just because something nice is pretty good branding.
That would tarnish the brand though by having an ad thing.
No, because we were very clear from the beginning. Geek Nights will never have an advertisement in it, ever.
So our website that says Geek Nights at the top it has this other podcast on it that's not related to Geek
no, you link to it. It goes to a different URL, Bike Nights something. Part of it. We never said that the Front Row Crew umbrella would never have ads. We only said Geek Nights would never have ads. Also, fuck ads. Anyway. So Emily and I went biking, and we biked to Poughkeepsie a couple times. It's about a 100-mile ride. So we decided to, because it's way more downhill coming back to New York City from Poughkeepsie.
I mean, honestly, it is more downhill coming back, but it's not significantly up or downhill either way. It's
about a 1,300-foot total climb going that way. Yeah. So coming back, you climb about 700 feet, but you descend about 1,300 feet. So you have way more time when you're on a downhill than an uphill.
Sure. But that's not that. But that number of feet that's like
because like when I do a real ride, it's like, all right, I climbed what, 1.5 miles, 2 miles, okay. But so we did the opposite direction, partly because we have to decide where the 2-hour train ride is, and it's either in the early morning when I fall asleep on the train and then wake up fresh in Poughkeepsie, or It's at the very end of a 100-mile ride, and now I have to drag myself onto a train, and if I miss it, I'm fucked for 2 hours, and get back to Grand Central at like 11 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
So,
All right, so here for measure, right? Also, this ride is also not a big climb. I went from my house to up Bear Mountain on the west side, then over the Bear Mountain Bridge, then to Cold Spring, and then took the train home. That was only 78 miles total, and it was 4,400 or 4,500 or 4,500 almost, right? Feet of climbing, right? So, yeah, 1,000 is not, and that's not a big climb. So 1,000 is basically flat.
So anyway, we do the bike ride, and so the last time, I think I haven't talked about this on Geek Nights, we were up there, like we biked to Poughkeepsie, and we thought, oh, we'll bike over that bridge that goes over the Hudson, and then we'll declare victory, bike back over the bridge and get some food and take the train home. And the bridge was closed for a private event with no detour and no way to get a bike across that bridge, despite the fact that that bridge is part of the New York State Empire Trail that is supposedly part of our infrastructure, and the governor encourages people to use it for long bike travel. Like, they made a big deal about this fucking thing.
Governor say anything about
Well,
it.
the old governor said it. The new governor hasn't said shit about it. So they closed it for a private event, which super fucks anyone who actually planned.
Also, private event on public property is
the
only.
I'm bad news bears all around on that. So for this trip, in advance, I found their website for that bridge, and I looked at it to see if there were any events that would block it. And the website said there is an event that blocks the bridge on yesterday until 10:30 in the morning, which wouldn't have mattered because we weren't going over the bridge anyway, but I just
Why
wanted
are there
to
so
know.
many events on this bridge?
Because the upstate New York's trying to capitalize on this giant infrastructure park project that they got.
I don't know. Anyway.
Local politicians strutting their stuff. So whatever, we get up there, and guess what? Both directions are closed. In fact, the entire Dutchess County Trailway is closed.
For what reason?
They were running, Poughkeepsie was running a foot race there. Okay. They closed the whole thing. There were cops blocking the entrance. So we pull up, and the cops like, you can't go in there, and they're like a little aggro. So I'm like, all right, is there a detour? No detour. Is there any other path? Nope, no other path. Where does the race end? No one could tell us. There was no map. There was nothing. So now we're in Poughkeepsie, planning to bike 105 miles to Queens, and the only path that is good to go through that area is closed for an indeterminate distance for like 4 hours. There's no way to know this in advance. Like, there's no like unified website you can go to for this. Like, a highway, if it's closed by law, there's a detour. Like, that's just how infrastructure works. In Queens, if they close the bike path on the Queensboro Bridge because it's open 24/7, they run a shuttle to take your bikes back and forth, so you can still use it at 3 a.m. if you really want to. Yet this infrastructure bike path that goes from New York up to Poughkeepsie and ostensibly all the way across to fucking Buffalo, shitto towns can just close it without telling anyone for no reason and just screw anyone who happens to be on a long bike ride. So
I don't disagree at all with anything that you just said. I do just want to point out, you know, this is somewhat of an apt punishment because you're so obstinate and only willing to bike on this one place and not biking anywhere else. If you just come and bike where I bike, I'd never have these problems because I go on roads.
Because we couldn't use the bike path up there, my plan was we took normal country highway roads, the ones you described, just like across and around to where we figured there's no way that race is that far out. And we were correct. We actually got back on the bike path like right after the race.
How far could it be? 5K?
There was a marathon that was part of it. So
I'm sure the marathon they weren't closing off marathon levels of track.
I mean, even if they did, the direction we went, we can bike 26 miles on regular country roads. So we had numerous cars honk at us, freak out at us for being on the road. And at one of them, the lady got so freaked out and aggressive that I videoed her and I even tweeted about it, chasing me, gunning her car at me, screaming at me, and honking because I was a bike on the road.
No, I don't have these. I mean, that's definitely a thing that happens, but
yeah, but I have video of it happening.
Often. The last time it happened to me was the guy who was he wasn't actually angry. He was riding in the bike lane, right? He wasn't angry yet until I stopped and prevented him on 10.
Oh, yeah, that guy.
Yeah, that guy. So before that guy, I can't even remember the last time somebody was aggressive to me. And I think the reason is, you know, not only am I biking on roads, right? But I'm biking on roads with lots of cyclists, right? I'm biking on the roads that are popular with the New York cycling people, right? It's like they know where to go, the hot places, right, that are friendly, that have rest stops, that are, are businesses that are friendly, let cyclists come in and eat and pee, right?
Yeah, but see, I don't want any of those things. I want to be able to
tire, 10 people stop and try to help you.
See, I don't want any of that. I really like solo travel, and I really like to be able to ride on any road, except obviously grade-separated freeways. Like,
I mean,
though in Australia, you can bike on the grade-separated freeways because they have bike lanes because they're not a barbaric country like the U.S. is.
Yeah. I'm saying, just giving things the way they are, right? Riding where it's popular with cyclists to ride is a good idea, and you should be more open to doing that and come with me at least one time instead of just always riding on the same path every single time and not going anywhere else.
How many times do you think we've ridden that ride?
Like 4, maybe.
Nope, 3. Twice up, and then we did once back just to see what it was like in reverse.
All right,
but also more to the point, I just don't.
What other long rides did you do this year?
Big ones around the city, like out to the Rockaways and around and back. That Queens Boulevard goes way out.
Outside of the 5.
Oh hell no! I hate biking on country roads, and I avoid them.
You haven't done it apparently.
No, because they suck, and I hate riding on them.
Maybe you should come and bike where it's popular with cyclists to ride outside the city where you've never been and don't know how it is. That's all I'm saying.
Nah, I'm saying that doesn't seem worth it.
Just come one time.
I did on the Harlan County Rail Ride, which I'll do every year, and I'll do next year.
I'm talking about going over the George Washington Bridge to New Jersey and then again crossing the border into New York again, right? Where
the times I biked over there has not been super pleasant compared to a nice, lush, wooded path.
I think you just don't know where you're going over there. You ever been on Piermont?
Scott, I think that, all the time, just not biking. Biking around Bear Mountain sounds like it sucks.
It doesn't suck.
Why not just go hike there?
Hiking popular with cyclists. It's not the terrain is much more interesting. It's much more hilly. It's much
hilly. That doesn't sound like fun. I'd rather be climbing and hiking there.
Okay. All right.
I go to Bear Mountain to hike and climb. And actually, Bear Mountain's too small.
I'm climbing with a machine that makes climbing much more efficient.
Yeah, and kind of boring. Anyway.
And here, I can sell you on this. Right? If I'm trying to actually sell you on it, right? Here's how I could sell you on it. Big, fast downhill. I love them. Whoosh. You get to whoosh.
There's plenty of those, actually.
I think it's dangerous, and I'll go slow.
Actually, there are plenty of those on the bike path to Poughkeepsie, and there's no cars or anything.
I've taken the path to Poughkeepsie. There are no whooshes like there are on the other side of the river.
If you come back in the opposite direction, there are some ones. I've gotten up to 45.
Yeah, I mean,
granted, I can get up at 45 going over the Queensboro Bridge, so...
Yeah, you should see the steepness of some of these downs that are going on over there. Of course, then on the way home, you got to do up.
Yeah.
Which is what I prefer, but,
So, in some news, there was a news back in July that we didn't really talk about, and it escalated, and it looks like the conclusion happened, and there's updates, so we can speak about it now, partly because I forgot about it until recently, and partly because we seem to know the full story, or at least most of the story. So, there was a story... in late June, where people all over America and possibly globally discovered that if they had a Western Digital MyBook, it was just deleted. All their data was gone, unrecoverable.
Oh yeah, this happened like a while ago.
So it kept happening, and lots of people just lost all their data, got completely fucked by this.
I mean, I have a little Western Digital passport, single magnetic spinning drive with a USB 3 cable, but I don't use it for saving stuff. I use it for a big transfer, or if I'm going on a trip and I'm on a trip such that my SD cards need to be emptied, but I'm not bringing a computer with me, right? I'll copy the SD cards to it, then erase the SD card so I can keep taking more photos and videos and filling that thing up, and then as soon as I get home, I empty that thing onto the NAS.
Yep.
Which is much safer.
So in some updates, what seemed to be Western Digital, they gave advice to customers to unplug these devices or you're going to lose all your data. So, all right, something was going on there. Could have been fucked up hardware, could have been firmware, could have been a bad update, they pushed out an update to these devices, could have been hackers, but...
Could have been user error.
So in this case, definitely not user error, even from the initial reports.
It's always a possibility. I'm not saying that's what it was.
It was just too widespread. So... early reports were that it only affected people who use the Western Digital Cloud stuff, but then it was clear not using it did not protect you at all. In fact, if you didn't set up any of that stuff, it could still happen. So fast forward to now, there's an update. I'll link to an article that was posted toward the end of June, but this seems to...
tore one down and figured it out.
So basically, there were multiple things going on, and the story is way more nuts than you might have expected. So people were assuming there was a 0-day exploit in a bunch of Western Digital stuff, and people thought that's what they were exploiting. It turns out there was an even older bug from 2018 that had just been unpatched up until 2021. Both were involved. And the long story, you can read this article that go into way depth. Like, I'm not going to give you the play-by-play. It's just too long and complicated. But it seems like there's one set of hackers who might have done an inside job at Western Digital to get someone in Western Digital to comment out the code that checked that someone had provided a real password before allowing a factory reset. Like, there's a snip of a code that someone commented out, and that just got distributed to all Western Digital devices. But separately, it appears that a different hacking group, either to attack that first hacking group or as an unrelated consequence, went after the same devices and triggered the data wipes for unknown reasons. And they're like, this is a crazy complicated story. The only real takeaway I have for all of you is never, ever, 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 even though this wouldn't necessarily have protected you in this case, buy consumer-grade storage hardware and connect it to the internet in any way that allows you to access your data outside of your own home. You cannot trust this stuff.
My NAS, even my NAS, which is, pretty fancy Synology NAS, they're very trustworthy, right, and such. It's like, the NAS has these features that let you access the NAS from far away. Like so that way you could send or get files to
my NAS cannot even get my NAS can get out of my network to get to the Synology site to download updates and has no other access to the world.
Yep, and that there's features that let you use Synology cloud services and things to integrate with your NAS and whatnot. It's like, I don't use any of that shit.
Oh no, my NAS can also connect to Amazon Glacier to upload my weekly sync backup.
Sure, but it's my NAS doesn't have any more. There's no way to access my NAS from outside, right? It's the same way you can't access my computer from the outside. It's a one-way street.
But more importantly, you have to have an offline backup of your data, because even the advice we just gave you might not have protected you from this Western Digital thing. This is a fucked up story.
All right, well, my NAS is the offline backup, right?
Yep. But as in, you really should have, even if you have a NAS or a SAN, you should have another copy of that data, even if it's not refreshed that often, that is completely offline, as in it is powered off somewhere.
I guess if I really needed to, but
yeah. I mean, how I do that is I put it on Glacier, so there's an encrypted blob of all the data.
That's cloud. That's not offline.
It is cloud, but it serves the purpose of an offline backup, because say somehow
it's
malware
not offline backup at all.
What do you mean?
So it's very online.
That's not what most professionals mean in my space, at least by offline backup. They usually mean the data is inaccessible to the applications that use it and inaccessible to other systems. Yeah,
that's true. But
as in
offline, like a hard drive in a drawer that's not powered on.
Yeah, because that is a somewhat archaic backup strategy at this point. I mean, maybe consumers don't have a lot of data.
It could be useful for your most important shit.
Yeah. What I do is the NAS just has it syncs to Amazon Glacier. So say something got into my environment and wiped or encrypted all the data on my NAS and my hard drives and everything.
It could get your Glacier credentials from the NAS and then wipe that.
I don't think the way it's set up it actually could. If they compromise my NAS to that degree,
I guess it's not impossible, right?
Yeah.
But nobody can get into your hard drive in a drawer.
I mean, that is true.
Hard drive in a fireproof box.
Though I have so much data on that NAS that the only way to have a completely offline local physical backup would be to have another NAS of the same size.
Exactly. That's
Which
why I don't have one.
I thought way back we thought about doing that if we both buy the same NAS and agree to back each other up, but we just never bothered.
If I had a lot of money, sure.
Yeah.
I could get whatever. Anyway.
But anyway, do not put all your stuff on one hard drive you bought from Western Digital.
I think it just don't use the web, net features of your NAS. Keep your NAS on your LAN. Don't, if you need to connect to get your files while you're out of the house, then you should, sort of mirror the files onto a service, right? Like a Dropbox or a Google Docs or something like that.
Yep.
Anyway.
So along those lines, Western Digital had some other bad news in August, a little under a month ago, where they have some NVMe solid state drives, the ones you plug into your M.2 slot, these super fast hard drives. But they had a SKU, an SKU, like a unique product that they sold that had achieved a certain level of performance, benchmarked by third parties to that level of performance, a Western Digital like blue budget SSD, and it was fine. Without telling anyone, except burying it deep in their like update text, like a changelog that literally no human on earth will ever read, they changed it looks like they changed the hardware to be slightly shittier, and they changed the firmware to drastically reduce the performance of these things. And they didn't tell anyone and kept selling them under the same model number.
Yep. This is I think we've talked about this before because they've done.
Oh, this has happened so many times.
Yeah, there's been similar stories with this, with like using what was called like this, what was it called? The shingled storage on the magnetic drive, something like that, right?
Oh yeah, the shingled storage that is for some kinds of consumers doesn't matter, but for someone like us is a fatal performance hit.
Yeah, so it's like they keep doing this, and I really don't understand it at all, because all you have to do to avoid the bad attention,
change the model number slightly.
Just change the model number, to something different so that there's no confusion and no shenanigans. Right?
Because we both know they are banking on that confusion.
Right, and it's like, right, but it's like anyone who cares and notices, right, is gonna... Right, it's like,
well, I've run into this my whole life.
You're fooling them by not changing the model number. You got caught. Anyone who's smart enough to care and notice about it, right, is gonna catch you, and it's not gonna work. And anyone who doesn't give a shit because they're just like, I just need a hard drive for my computer, they're not looking up stuff like this. They'll just buy. You change the model number, fine. They'll just buy that new model number, even though it's crappier. They don't know or care. Right?
No, I've run into this with. So when I got my Mackie mixer,
by making the new model number, but by trying to pull shenanigans and that are so obvious and easily caught, just hurts you and makes people say, "Well, fuck you, Western Digital. I'll go buy from someone else," because clearly you're just trying to be evil for no reason.
So for both my Mackie mixer and that DVD player that I brought to RIT. There was a situation where the SKU was the same, but depending on other factors that you could try to suss out from the serial numbers, there were fundamentally different components that behaved differently in those devices. And I remember I was trying to get the Mackie mixer that was made after a certain date because it literally just had more features for the same price, and there is no way to know which one you're getting except by complete luck or buying one used. And I think that kind of thing should be straight up illegal.
Yep, I definitely think, this is a thing that happens, here we have Western Digital doing it for intentional deception purposes, at least by all evidence.
Oh, I'm considering their statement at the end. I'll read Western Digital's statement. Quote, "For greater transparency going forward, if we make a change to an existing and internal SSD, we commit to introducing a new model number whenever any related published specifications are impacted." Props to the lawyer who wrote that statement, but...
Anyway, but here we have what appears to be intentional deception. But very often, this is just a thing that happens, right? Like if you're in the 80s and you went to go buy Zelda 1 on a cartridge, there were like two different versions of that. At some point, they changed it slightly. And they didn't tell you on the cartridge that like this is Zelda 1.1 or whatever the heck.
I had a VCR that didn't do macrovision. And I had an identical VCR that did do macrovision. I would have paid a lot to get that non-macrovision one had I known that was an option.
Yeah, and a lot of times you can look up online, my Apple II GS, right? It's an old computer. There are like several different board revisions for the Apple II GS, like 3. But if you went to go buy an Apple II GS in 1986 or 87, you didn't know which hell one. Your Apple didn't say like, oh, Apple II GS now better, different board. It's like it was.
Well, in fact, these kinds of stealth updates, like if a company is going to make a stealth update, even if it's for completely benign, normal reasons, if there's any difference in performance at all, they definitely really don't want consumers to know because they definitely want to be able to sell all that remaining inventory. And like, look at Nintendo. People are like, ooh, I want to get the later Switch because XYZ changes that may or may...
Nintendo is telling everyone.
Yeah.
Right? So they're not like hiding it. So for them, it's an intentional move where one costs more than the other.
Yeah, but
right?
suppose
it's not like the same price.
But suppose they didn't cost more and there was no way to distinguish them, if consumers know about it, even if the change doesn't affect them, they will tend to want the newer, better one just because why get an inferior thing if I know for sure that they're different? But Western Digital really just kind of has shit the bed on a lot of these issues lately. I will say that other than my spinning discs, I don't use any Western Digital hard drives. I actually went full Samsung because in the year 2021...
All my SSDs and M2 drives are Samsung. My magnetic discs, I think...
Mine are all Western Digital in my spinning discs. They're all reds in the NAS, and they're blacks.
Seagate, but Seagate, I don't know what happened to Seagate. Who knows? I got to do research again to figure out.
We figured out what happened to Seagate. We talked about it on GeekNights, but I forget.
I forgot.
I also forget. We're all... Find a GeekNights from 2008, and you'll figure out why Seagate sucks now. But
right,
so some other news?
Yeah. So if you're from the UK, right, which I'm not, but I've gathered from the internet and from other UK peoples that in the UK, gaming consoles were never like a big thing. It was definitely a PC kind of place. And they had like a different sort of, the way that Japan has like a different PC history with things like, the MSX and whatnot, and FM Towns and all those things. The UK had its own sort of PC history.
The ZX Spectrum.
For Apple II, the way we do I guess they might have had Commodore, but they didn't have Apple IIs, I think, the way we did in the US so much. The big thing over there was the ZX Spectrum, right? Not ZX, ZX, right?
Yeah.
If you don't know what that is, if you see a picture of it, you'll know exactly what it is. It's a little guy. It's like a keyboard, and you plug it into a TV, right?
Yeah.
And there you go. You got yourself a computer with a Z80 processor, and it was a lot of fun. You get games on there and shit, right? So the person who created that, it was the Sinclair, ZX Spectrum. And the person who invented that was Sir Clive Sinclair, who passed away 4 days ago. So that's the news, right? This important computing guy. I don't know if he was a good person or a bad person because I don't know anything about him. I didn't realize that Sinclair was actually, I'm completely honest. I knew that it was the Sinclair ZX Spectrum. I didn't know that there was a person Sinclair behind that until 4 or 5 days ago. But yeah, the person passed away at the age of 81, which is interesting because that means Sinclair, when he was making these computers in the early 80s and we were born, he was as old then about-ish as we are now.
Well, it looks like he was doing radio kits in the 60s.
Yeah, he was basically doing all kinds of interesting stuff. If you look through his history, making like electric vehicles, little bicycles, right? Watches, calculators, like... very much in the vein of like the Dyson guy, right? Making all sorts of stuff. But
yeah.
The ZX Spectrum specifically was just a huge deal, just as far as personal computing goes, around the world.
The face he's making in the photo they put on this article, I feel like that's the face of a good person. But again, I don't know. I'm sure if I'm going to find out when I Google later, but I hope not. I hope he's just cool.
Yeah. So yeah, but yeah, it's like the ZX Spectrum is just a really interesting thing. Is that only ever having used one for like moments at a time here and there, right? You look at it, and I have a nostalgia for this thing that I've never owned and touched maybe twice for a minute.
Yeah.
But you just look at it, and it's like, oh, this black keyboard with these colored stripes on it.
Well, because all those old computers, they remind me like. There was an era in my life, because we were later, like the computer I had in my house as a kid was a 486. SX2. But there was that era where computers weren't connected to anything yet. And you could really just, as a kid, a computer was just a box of magic fun, but it didn't really matter what power or capabilities the computer had. The fact that you had a computer at all was a big deal. So the ZX Spectrum, kids in that era, just fuck around with it. Learn a lot about computers along the way.
And there were many, many choices too then, right? Of completely different computers.
Yeah.
Like, by the 90s, it was like, okay, you bought a Compaq or an HP or a Pack, whatever.
A Packard Bell is what we had.
Yeah, it's like, or whatever you bought, right? An IBM, it's like, yeah, they were not the same, but they all ran DOS and Windows.
Yep, like my 486 was
a Mac, that was different.
My 486 was not different from any computer anyone else I knew had Except
That's how we're still in that situation today. You're either buying a Windows computer or an Apple computer, and that's your two choices. In the 80s, there were a lot of choices that had nothing to do with each other. An Atari, a Commodore, a ZX Spectrum, an Apple, some kind of IBM XT something.
Yep, get a Tandy.
All these computers were super, they were super different. A Radio Shack Coco, right? A TRS-80 or whatever. There's so many different computers, all with different chips, completely different software, completely incompatible in every way, right? You learned how to use one, you didn't know how to use another one.
Nope. And sometimes you had to know about the hardware to make these things work, like directly.
Yep. And especially in the UK, this one, this guy made the one that was the biggest deal. So this is almost like, if Steve Jobs didn't turn Apple around and it died, and then he died. That's what this is like. This guy, he was the king in the 80s, so was Steve Jobs, but Steve Jobs was the king again. This guy was not the king again, right? And then he died. So that's the level of this story that we're at here.
And one last little news. You might have seen us complaining about this on the internet. To make a long story short, Google has a thing that they launched a long time ago. It's changed names a bunch of times. There's a whole right now, Dateline 2021 in September, it is Google Workspaces. But
so originally the very first incarnation of it was called Gmail for your domain. Right? And the way it worked was you have a Gmail account, and instead of it being at gmail.com, you just want to change it to be at the domain you registered.com. So at frontrowcrew.com. So we signed up for it then. And that's all it did in those days, was just let you have at gmail.com. And instead, have a Gmail account, you log into google.com, but your email address is different. That's the only feature it had originally. And then they kept adding to it, right? So it was like a separate, special, different Google account that worked just like a regular Google account, but you could sort of administer it. You could administer a group of accounts underneath your domain, right? And they kept adding stuff to it, which wasn't always good and bad. Sometimes it was bad because you couldn't access regular old Google services with your special account. But eventually they sorted that out. I remember there were a lot of stuff with Google Plus. It got weird.
Yep. But they sorted it all out, and then they started unsorting it again.
Right. Well, they made it Google Workspaces or Google Apps and whatever. I don't know. And basically they changed it into a product for companies, because most people who would have a domain instead of gmail.com would be companies, right?
Yep.
They want to have,
because as much as you might be thinking, oh, but like the original use case, what if a family wants to have their own domain? The reality is, imagine if your Uncle Joey Jojo was the admin for your email.
Right, there's all sorts of problems for families doing it, because the admin can read all the other people's email and shit, right? You don't want to do that. Families, normal people can just use at gmail.com, right?
Yep. But Scott and I, technology-wise, trust each other, so we're in this domain.
There's other benefits, right? It's like if something happens to me, right? Someone can get my, we don't have to worry about things like that. Anyway, but yeah, if it wasn't for that, I'd probably be using regular old Gmail like everyone else. But anyway,
of course, there was a long time where regular old Gmail had ads and shit that I had never seen in my life.
Yep. Well, yeah, it still has ads and shit we've never seen in our lives. So anyway, it's a product now for companies. If you start a company and you want to get email addresses, they charge you X dollars per user, per employee at your company, basically.
Yep. Like every convention you know about does this for their emails.
Exactly. However, what they've always done, which is good of them in some ways, is anyone who was on the old thing got grandfathered in. So we have this and we don't have to pay for it because we signed up for it when it was new.
Yep.
No way we could sign up for it now.
If
we didn't start GeekNights until today, it would be impossible. We'd have to pay per user to get it.
Granted, I would probably pay. There are a lot of benefits.
We have a lot more users, so we'd have to kick other people off.
Oh yeah, I would have kicked everyone off or made them pay us for the privilege.
Yeah, it would just be like us two paying $10 a month each. I can't afford all the people we have on there. And I don't think they would pay because it gets them nothing, really. They don't.
But the problem that happened is that as a result, this is my Google account. And Google has started to fuck that up. Like Google Pay just does not work with these things anymore.
Right. So what happened with Google Pay? And to their credit, they only give you real tech support if you pay, which we don't. But I was able to get real tech support for the Google Pay thing because it involved money, because you're Google Pay, right? So, And the tech support person gave me straight answers, detailed answers. And what they basically said was like, look, we had the old Google Pay, and you could use that with your account. But with the new Google Pay, we can't let you use that with your account because security-wise, if you're controlling the DNS on that domain, right, and you're transferring money from an email address at that domain, right, you could pull shenanigans. So to prevent those shenanigans, we can only let you use Google Pay if you're at gmail.com and we control the DNS. And I'm like, that at least makes sense.
Yep. Granted, it causes another problem of, okay, so now anyone using Google Pay and transferring money has to trust that that's the right specific Gmail account of a person, because Gmail is just a cesspool.
That's always been a problem. That's a problem with all these payment things.
It is.
Anyway, so as a result, we were happily using Google Pay, and now we can't use Google Pay anymore at all unless I use it with my make another Gmail account that's like a regular consumer one.
Yeah, but then I have to have my phone logged into both of those accounts, and
it doesn't work. It's a pain in the ass. So it's a non-starter. I have to use a different. And basically, they kicked me off Google Pay. I use something else now. Right?
So then in September 7th, they did something where suddenly everyone, not just us, who had a Google Workspaces account, could not access.
It seemed to be mostly the people who had the grandfathered ones.
Yep. No. So in my employer, we used Google Workspaces because we have Google Drive and stuff, and I couldn't go to Google News at work either.
It didn't happen to in my employee is also we use that and I was able to.
Yep, and it seems like it slowly was affecting everyone depending on when various caches timed out.
Google News, right, was if you had one of these accounts and you logged it and you tried to read Google News, it gave you this error that said, hey, you can't use Google News. And go log into the admin feature, because basically if you log into the admin of this thing, you can choose which Google apps you want to let the employees at your company use. You could be like, hey, the employees at my company, they can use Gmail, Gdocs, and Google Sheets, and that's it. You could do that if you wanted to. You could also be like, you know what? If my employees want to use YouTube, go nuts, right? Use everything you want. But Google News was not one of the choices in that list. You can't turn it on or off. So they turned it off, and so a bunch of people started complaining, and as a result, there was there's like these Google like groups, like forums, like community forums where you go for support because you can't get real support, and somebody who was, I guess, like, mod there or something was like, hey, what they said wasn't false. It was that, hey, Google News is not one of the apps that's part of the program, right? So the fact that it's not working is like, hey, use a regular Google account, deal with it, right?
So that was a big fuck you to the users, and to their credit, before I even could write anything nasty in there, a lot of other people did.
Oh, tons of people writing nasty stuff. So I was I learned, first of all, I think the person's problem was that they just weren't reading people's messages and responding accordingly.
Yeah.
Right? They were doing a bad job where the Google Pay support person did a great job, right? But forget about that.
I mean, knowing what I know about the inside of Google, I'm not confident that real Google employees would have done any better, just to be honest.
Yeah, who knows? But forgetting that bad support person, I learned that a lot more people have these grandfathered free accounts than I thought. I thought hardly anyone had it, but apparently a lot of people have it.
Yeah.
2, somebody suggested that the reason that these grandfathered accounts just haven't been blown away and we're still safe is because they suspect that several high-profile Silicon Valley individuals have these accounts, which makes perfect sense.
Yeah, because Google doesn't give a shit about us. They could just turn this off and literally fuck us into the earth, and there'd be nothing we could do about it.
Yep. But it makes perfect sense that, like, big time Silicon Valley people probably signed up for that shit in the mid 2000s when I did.
Yeah.
Right. And they have a lot of clout and would not let and so Google would take a lot of heat from them if it were to shut it down. And that is a plausible reason. I have no evidence, just someone suggested it.
But the thing is, if Google did shut this down, what I'm not confident they would do, because they're terrible at this, is they'd have to give people like us a path to turn one of these accounts into a regular Google account. But there is no even remotely plausible path to migrate away from one of these things.
Nope, not at all. I have backups.
The entire Geek Nights YouTube channel.
Turn those backups into something would be such a tremendous effort based on the format that they are in, but I do have backups.
The Geek Nights YouTube channel, my personal YouTube channel, which is also the Geek Nights YouTube channel, Scott's YouTube channel. Like, this is not stuff you can just move somewhere.
Nope. At least not with any feature that Google exposes to the public.
Yeah,
right?
but
they don't give any support, so they don't expose it by phone or anything either.
And it's endemic of just the fundamental problem with Google is that it has too many things going on, too many product managers, and its internal
keep shutting stuff down.
Well, because its internal structure is set up to, like, the people who have an incentive to build something new are the ones who seem to do better within the company if they launch something, but keeping something running or making something that already exists better is extremely deprioritized, and it seems like it's mostly multiple people will fight over who gets to launch a feature, and that seems to be how most decisions get made.
Yeah. Regardless, it ended up just being some kind of bug because Google News was fixed within a day or so.
Yep.
Right? It was back online. So it was just, so the person in support clearly had no actual contact inside of Google because they would have found out that it was just a bug that was getting fixed and would have been able to tell us that.
Yep.
But it was just as quietly as it broke, it was quietly repaired. We all can read Google News again. So Google Pay is the only thing we've lost.
But I still don't trust Google at all.
Right, I still don't trust them, but I have no choice. And I still have said this before, and I'll say it again. If you have a website with accounts, right, that public people can sign up for, there needs to be a law in place such that you have some sort of real human with real administrative powers who can be reached and communicated with by the account holders, right? Now, what that person might do when you contact them, right, is who knows what their policies are.
I could hire someone for a minimum wage to literally just say nope to anything anyone asks and just have an infinite backlog of unanswered emails and unanswered phone calls.
Well, they should have to. There should be some limits on response time.
Oh yeah, I hire an army of people at minimum wage to say nope.
Right. But there also needs to be, if the accounts are essential to someone's, livelihood, business, etc., right? There at least needs to be a mandated by law escape hatch of some sort, right?
Well, especially with email, because email went from when we made these accounts.
We have email backups. I've backed up every
Oh, no,
email
but
that
I'm
we
saying
have.
email, especially a Google email, has become the de facto single sign-on for a huge number of people globally. See also Facebook single sign-on.
Yep, which I don't use.
But they become your identity online in a way that is not able to be, I'm not even going to say easy to disentangle. You just cannot disentangle that kind of thing at this point. Like my Strava account is just fucked if I have a problem with this account. And because spam is such a problem, it's not like we could just make our own email service and redirect the domain we own to that because no one would accept emails from us.
Well, I mean, so many people these days just aren't even using email. They're just using SMS.
I meet a lot of people who don't have an email address that they use or that I could email them at. It's there's probably a Monday episode somewhere in that conversation, but anyway,
yep.
Things of the day. So check this out. Now, full disclosure, I did not run the executable that comes out of this at the end, so I am trusting that it is not malware because it seems really cool and people have talked about it, but I'm just saying I did not personally go through these steps. But someone, this Twitter account tweeted 4 images of the old Doom shareware, just Doom shareware. They just tweeted it, and then they informed everyone that was actually Doom, that you have a copy of the shareware, which they can legally redistribute. And then they go on to explain that they use steganography to encode all of the information necessary to recreate the entirety of the Doom shareware in those 4 images in the original tweet. And then they show you using command line on Linux, step by step, how to just turn those images into this software. It's just an amazing, fun little thing. It's also funny how the code, the entirety of Doom shareware is less than like the size of one image I might upload to Twitter via my phone.
Yeah, you can fit all the whole Doom shareware into 4 JPEG screenshots.
Not even 4 JPEG screenshots. the lower 4 bits of the pixels of those screenshots.
Right, so less than the whole screen.
Anyway, so what do you got?
So the Internet Archive, is a place that has all kinds of good stuff. But I feel like, people who know about the Internet Archive and believe in it and support it rarely use it. Partly because searching it is kind of slow.
Yeah, like unless I'm researching something specific.
Yeah. But there are really treasure troves of amazing stuff on there but the problem is you have to think to know that I could go and get that there. I could, and that would be amazing. So I stumbled today upon one of the collections in the Internet Archive, it's almost like walking around a library and going into a door and finding out that they have a collection of, whatever, right, that you didn't know was there, So there was a collection of exactly what induced us to make today's episode about computing magazines. This specific old computing magazine called Computist, aka Hardcore Computist. It's had a few different names, but this is an old magazine from the 80s. And it's mostly an Apple II related magazine, but most of the content of the magazine is talking about
you're dancing around. I know what Computist was all about.
Yeah, talking about ways.
You want me to read one of the entries? I just pulled up a random article from a random one from 1984, issue 12.
To take copy protected softwares and remove the copy protecting part.
So this article is called "Backup for Sabotage" by Clay Harrell. Which lists some requirements. Sabotage was a game that I played on my Apple blah, blah, blah. The last time I tried to play it, I noticed the original disc was having a hard time loading, blah, blah, blah. Here's the crack to make it work if you don't want to pay for it.
Exactly. So it's there's an issue that was it has Ultima 4 and Castle Wolfenstein, and it's here's what you do. Take the floppy disk, copy it to another floppy disk, go to the copy, do this.
Open this executable file, change these bytes.
Yep. Type in these commands. Do this with this software tool that you have, that we assume you have because you're doing this a lot, right? Do these things, and there you go. You now have a version of Ultima 4 that you can copy all you want and play all you want without having to deal with any, anti-piracy stuff. It's just, completely unlocked.
I will never not remind people that when I was getting into computing in the early days, I did not know that piracy was a thing, and I just was software, a copy of software, cool.
I saw those messages, and I didn't really understand what they were talking about. Right?
The first game I ever installed on my computer, Scorched Earth. That was the second game. Scorched Earth was the first game. The second game.
The first I had Wolfenstein 3D on a 3.5-inch floppy that just somebody had scrawled Wolfenstein 3D on the label.
No, someone at school handed me a disc, and on it was Stunts 4D Racing. And when I launched it, a splash screen appeared that said "cracked by Kilofits," and then the game just worked. Years later, I discovered that was not in the actual game, and that was in fact the hack that was used so it could be redistributed.
Yeah, so this magazine is has other things in it too, but it's really really interesting stuff, really cool, a lot of fun to look through this. But also there's other old computer magazines out there, and the best ones are the ones that have basically just code that you can read.
Yeah.
So look for those on here as well, and have yourself a good old time. You can make that your only nerdery, just reading old computer magazines. Yeah. There are so many of them. Oh my god.
All right, so in the meta moment, the GeekNights Book Club book, which we are both reading still to finish now.
I'm making progresses.
The Tale of Genji. Not just a novel, but the first novel.
The first novel written by human beings that we know about, ever.
Yep. What's interesting is, as I get further along, I'm hitting a point where my opinion of the book and the things I have to say are not changing further. It's falling into
getting better at reading it.
That is true. I'm getting more used to who's who, or at least not getting hung up on wait, where the fuck are we now?
Yep.
Otherwise, we're still not going to cons until they don't need to require masks anymore. So stay tuned for what we do. I'm working on a couple of panels that maybe I'll just make or we'll make and just do online. There'll be some online cons that have online content. Our last PAX panel is just on YouTube, Atari Game Design. You can just watch it in all of its glory from PAX East Online 2021. I think the Game Devs of Color Expo is coming up this week. There's going to be real good content.
Yeah, it already starts on Thursday, I think.
Yeah, real good content at GDOC. Like, better talks than I typically see.
I got my ticket.
At PAXs and such. And let's just get right into it. So, computer magazines.
Yeah, so back in the day, even, if you had a computer, even when there was internet, in the 90s, early 2000s even, the internet people weren't just publishing all their content on the internet.
No, there was not a lot of content on the internet. You couldn't buy things on the internet, and a lot of times, most of the websites you'd go to until a way later year than you think were just made by some random person.
Yeah, it's not like today where every single article in the paper New York Times is also at nytimes.com, right? The New York Times is like, we don't want to do that. That's obviously a bad idea, right? So, and they were trying to preserve their existing, which they're still doing even today, but they were trying way harder then to preserve their existing media. Like, and before there was,
FARC didn't even appear until like the year 2000. So it's not like you could look stuff up online very much either.
Yeah. So magazines were still a huge deal in terms of getting content, especially journalism that was of a specialized nature, right? Because, the journalism that you had access to was the newspaper, which was for a mass audience. And you wouldn't find things in the newspaper that would give you detailed information about something specific in a niche, right? You would go to the bookstore, because how many magazines did they have if you're in a suburb, right? At the, the only magazines you can get regularly at a newsstand would be like, Time, Life, Sports Illustrated.
So at least we spent a lot of time in mall bookstores and like places where there was the magazine rack and there was always a big computer section.
All bookstore and library were the places that had all the
magazines.
The regular newsstand only had the kind of that you see in the barber shop, right?
But the thing is,
doctor's waiting room.
There was nowhere to learn about computers unless you were going to school, knew somebody who was actively teaching you, or primarily reading either these magazines or the underground zines.
Yep. Or you had internet and were on BBSs.
Yep. But even then, those BBSs, that was more of a crapshoot of good information compared to the curated collection. Like the big deal with computer magazines, especially in the 80s through the mid 2000s, was that each one curated a different type of content, like what Scott just alluded to with his thing of the day. That magazine had mostly how to crack stuff content. But like PC Gamer versus Maximum PC versus PC World, they all had very different types of content. So depending on what area of computing you were interested in, they were almost like the digest way to learn about the current state of the art of that area. It's weird to talk about the pre-internet world. It's so radically different from how I live today.
Yep. So let's talk about, I'm just going to go through some of the magazines that I personally had experience with, right? So the one I had a lot of experience with that I was subscribed to for about a year, but also bought off the stand a few times, was Computer Shopper. And Computer Shopper was a weird...
Oh, I forgot about Computer Shopper.
Right? So Computer Shopper stood out in the 90s especially because it was fucking enormous. We're talking like... It's as thick and sort of on the same paper as like a Shonen Jump, right? That, that cheap paper, but it was really thin, like even thinner than Shonen Jump paper. It was in color, actually, quite a bit of it, not all of it. And it was mega thick and it was big. And it was in its own special thing. It couldn't go on the regular stand. It would be like in this own like metal bin full of Computer Shopper. Yep. It was cheap. It was like a couple bucks. And you bought it, and of course, why was it so cheap? Because it was hundreds of pages, mostly ads, almost all ads.
But
right,
that was
99% ads.
It was an era. Like it's fascinating because you'll see this if you look at old newspapers and like old timey advertising was often just a list of features and benefits of a product, and then a way to buy it. Like that was it. So a lot of the ads that I remember from Computer Shopper were, while they were ads, it was a different time, and they were directly informative. Like, I learned a lot about RAM and shit from reading Computer Shopper and, like, the ads in it.
So mixed in with the ads in the front part of the computer shopper would be your typical like review type stuff. Like, oh, this new video card, let's talk about it, right? Hardware, that kind of stuff. You know, the same stuff you might see on tomshardware.com.
Granted, for a lot of the time I was reading Computer Shopper, there weren't video cards, really.
That's true enough, right? But then in the back, for some reason, I guess, I don't know what its history was, but they were like preserving the history of the magazine in this tiny black and white section in the back where they had like these weird, quirky Alice and Bob articles that would be more at home in something like The Computist, right? Or a Dragon magazine.
I forgot all about Alice and Bob.
Right? Yeah, so they had this quirky little area in the back that they just kept preserving. I stopped reading it. It became a smaller magazine and a thinner one at some point, and then I'm pretty sure it died.
Oh, I didn't read it. Like, I would read it, like...
I never read one that wasn't a big fat one, so...
Yeah.
And I never got... And basically, the thing is, that magazine, despite being mostly ads, taught me, right, indirectly, how to build a computer. I built my first computer by looking at Computer Shopper and using just common sense. Like, I see a picture of RAM, and I finally can see a picture of a motherboard. That's probably the first time I ever saw a PC motherboard, right? And I saw, well, no, I guess I opened up the IBM and saw it in there, but
yeah, for me,
I saw a picture of motherboard, and I saw what RAM looked like, and I saw all the different things they were selling. They were selling power supplies. They were selling, you know, like hard drives, and I saw the things, pictures of them, and I was able to figure out from that, like, this is what I need to make a computer.
Yep. Right? I even would look at, there was an ad for a computer, and it listed all the components of the computer. So now I knew what things I had to buy to make my own computer.
Yeah. And one of the companies that had an ad in there was TC Computer. I don't think they exist anymore, which stood for Treasure Chest Computer. And I went to their website, and combined with the magazine and their website and the ads, I bought the parts for my first computer. They actually sent me the 8-bit motherboard with the Pentium 3 already in it, so I didn't have to do that part, but I had to do everything else. And I got all these parts. I got the right parts successfully, and then I figured out how to put them together by common sense and looking at what fit in what hole and what cables they sent me. And I successfully built a computer by looking at ads in a magazine.
I feel like because I didn't build a computer until the year 2000, right before I went to RIT. I think I mostly used
1999.
I think by then I used like the old Tom's Hardware and Egghead.com.
Yeah, this was 1999. Yeah, so
yeah, the
Computer Shopper. So that was a thing.
But the one that really got me was not Computer Shopper, because it was the 90s, like the late 90s is when I really got deep into PCs. Before that, I was mostly interested in the software because I couldn't afford or build or mess with the hardware. So I lived in the software world. But in the 90s, late 90s, I wanted to build computers. I was getting into gaming, like the hardware mattered more to me. So Maximum PC was the one I read because it was the flashy magazine that had the articles talking about the fancy, newest nonsense that I definitely could not afford.
If Maximum PC still existed, they would be the ones with like the cases with the cooling systems and the lights and all
Absolutely.
that kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
That was the atmosphere of Maximum PC.
But it had like this, every issue had this overview of like, what's the latest in the world of computing? And that's how I stayed on top of things way more than the internet in that era.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And it also would have a lot of articles talking about how hardware worked, which Computer Shopper never had. And that Maximum PC, I'm not to be clear, I never subscribed to that magazine. I would read it in the bookstore. Most of these I read in bookstores. The only one I got delivered and subscribed to was PC Gamer, which really we should talk about more on a Wednesday or a Tuesday episode.
PC Gamer was mostly video game magazine, right? It was the same as a Game Pro or anything else.
Yep.
It just only talked about PC games and included a CD because it was talking about
PC Gamer came with a disc.
Well, it came with, right.
Eventually it came with a CD.
Discs. Right, but it came with demos of games, sometimes full games, because you can do that when it's PC games. You couldn't really provide an NES cartridge with a Nintendo Power magazine.
But that, I guess my point there is that...
also talked about hardware in there as well. So it was like a double deal, right? They had game reviews and they had hardware stuff.
Except I barely read PC Gamer. I just wanted that disc.
I bought a few PC Gamers off the shelf at the bookstore to get the disc. I never subscribed to it. Anyway.
Yep.
So let's talk about, so you had your sort of zines that were sort of, I guess the biggest zine was 2600. It's still somewhat alive.
It's actually the only one I read. I would get the text of issues of 2600 from a local BBS that I would dial into.
2600 was big enough that actually they would have issues at the bookstore on the shelf with the other magazines, like at the Barnes and Noble or whatever, or the Borders. I actually have a book that was published at some point. It's like best of 2600 collection, like this huge fat book. It's on my shelf over there. But 2600 started out as like the phone freaking zine.
Yeah,
right?
which we were on the tail end. Like we were pretty young when that was dying out.
For that, yeah. So it was coming out out of that scene. So it has an origin that was really sort of hardcore and ultra nerdy and whatnot. But as time went on, right, the content didn't really get away from that. The content was still like, articles about deep technical specific stuff, right, in different areas. But, it was less underground. Like people knew about it. You could buy it literally at Borders Books. There it fucking is, right?
Yeah.
Published properly.
It had much less of a counterculture street cred by that point.
Yeah, and it wasn't doing so much the illegal type contents, right? Here's how to make free phone calls type stuff. Even though it was still deep technical topics of various computing and phone nature.
Mm-hmm.
So 2600 really, I think I'm not sure how or to what extent it still exists, but it does have a historical importance to it and is kind of representative, especially the earlier issues of what all those other zines were kind of like.
Yeah. It's interesting because that was an era when I would read old 2600s, but not more recent ones. And I was mostly interested in the stories and the technology of freaking and like all the old stuff that I mostly missed out on while trying to...
You didn't get to do it, but you learn about it.
I got to do a little bit. I did get a red box to work when I was in middle school.
Sure.
But that's just the one that plays the tones that makes a payphone work. Like that was a really easy thing to do. It
would work on an old payphone.
Yeah, it totally worked on old payphones up until like our early days in middle school in some parts of the U.S. That definitely does not work anymore.
There's another set of magazines that I'd never bought or read at all, but I knew about them.
Well, like PC Magazine, like all that stuff.
Right,
like
PC Magazine. There was like, I think the ZD had one. CNET might have had one also. And basically, those magazines read the way those websites read, right? These sort of popular sort of articles about what's going on in the world of personal computing and stuff, right?
Oh, CNET shut down their magazine in 2019.
Okay. They read, if you go to cnet.com and look at the articles, or go to ZDNet if that still exists and read the articles or any of those places, that's what those magazines were like, only full of ads, obviously, and on paper. And so I'd only read them if I was in like a dentist's office, and they mostly appealed to these people who were not ultra nerdy, like you're going to program a computer, but like you're an uncle, who's got...
It was everyone's uncle read these things.
Yeah, you're into computers, you care about computers, right? That you got your computer as like a little hobby, but you're not programming, you're not going lower than, simply going to CompUSA to have some fun, right?
Yeah,
so
I would say that those magazines, all the CNET adjacent magazines, there were so many of them. They were the things that might be in a dentist's office and you read out of boredom, or the people who liked them seemed to read them more for entertainment than knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Which is fair. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. Like, I read popular science for entertainment, not to learn anything in particular, because it didn't teach much past a certain point in its I
always remembered at the barber shop there was always a golf magazine, and I didn't golf, but I would read the golf magazine there, and it'd be fun. But it's like professional golfers were not reading the golf magazine.
No,
clear, right?
It's the same way at the dentist. I would read Reader's Digest because that's what was there.
Exactly.
I didn't have a Game Boy yet.
So there was a whole bunch of those. I think they're all dead now. There was one called Dr. Dobb's Journal. I don't know if this still exists or not, but it was sort of borderline scientific journal magazine, right? And the only time I read it is because it would be lying around just for free in, when I was in college in the computer science area. They would just have these lying around on tables, and I would read it occasionally. And it had like journal article type stuff in it among ads and other things, mostly to do with actual programming and computer science. Like, oh, here's a cryptography, and journal article, formatted in late LaTeX and everything, and I was like, oh, okay, but I'm not sure if it actually was a real journal where you tried to get your research published or not. But it sure read like one, only with ads in it. So that was a thing. I don't know if it's still around now.
Well, it's interesting because I see like that whole class of content itself, like, I don't know, there's a lot of websites like Gizmodo and Engadget and things that basically their articles are the same kind of content that would be in a lot of the PC Magazine articles back in the day, just on a website. But at the same time, the world is so different now that the format of read a magazine that is a curated selection of those articles every month doesn't really fit anymore. Like, I read the individual articles and individual sites based on specific interests, which is just a radically different paradigm from the pre-internet world.
So the last magazine category I can think of is this one that I got for free. I don't remember how the fuck I got it for free. I had like a 1 or 2 year subscription for $0 somehow in the late 90s. And it was called Silicon Alley Reporter. It doesn't exist now for sure.
I never encountered that one, I don't think.
Yeah, so it was basically, this came out of the 90s like investment boom kind of deal, right? Just with tech stocks booming up and startups and all that biz. And all the articles in it were a lot like the articles you'd read today on like, a Hacker News or a Tech Dirt kind of place, but just talking about startups and business more than it's talking about technology. And it had a mix of that sort of like, Silicon Valley disgusting culture, but it was the Silicon Alley Reporter. And it was basically trying to sort of promote New York as like, hey, in New York, we have a Silicon Alley. It's the same kind of thing as Silicon Valley, only in New York, right? Kind of trying to drum up that same disgusting culture here.
You know what? I usually say the other thing. Silicon Valley pays people in dreams, and in New York, they got to pay you cash. That's why nobody likes to talk about Silicon Alley.
But the Silicon Alley Reporter also, right, mixed in sort of like, a lot of like futurist type thinking articles. There would always be like 1 or 2 in there along with all the other stuff. So it's like I was getting it for free. I don't know how. And I stopped. You obviously didn't see it at RIT because it had stopped showing up by then.
I guess what I miss from this entire space, because we've gone on for well over an hour already, but I miss the computer magazines that would have an interesting project or how-to every month. Like, those were the most...
Make Magazine went under, right? Make Magazine was a thing. I never got Make Magazine because it was expensive. If it was cheaper, I would have gotten it. But I really liked all the things that like that Make organization was doing, especially the Maker Faire. They just went under, even pre-pandemic.
But I guess what I miss, and I don't think this is just me like having nostalgia and remembering incorrectly, but in those old the PC magazines that had how-tos and projects and like guides, like, hey, here's how to build a thing or do a cool thing. They did a lot more explanation of the how and why. And the instructions were usually airtight and really well put together with context. Online today, that type of content seems to have split into 2 directions. It's either, here's a bunch of stuff to copy paste into config files with no explanation that won't work even 2 months after it comes out, or it's a video. The least information dense way to present that information.
Well, it's also a consequence of just if you have some old computer and you need the computist to help you do something.
Yep.
Right? It's like that computer, you're working so much closer to the metal.
That you really needed that foundation and that help.
At least in terms of abstraction layers. And it's like you really need someone to tell you, like, type this, now press this key.
Yep.
Right. You don't need that on a current computer. Because you can describe someone to something at the higher abstraction layer. You could be like, install that and then do the, it's like, you don't have to be like, okay, put the disk in the computer, now type install, now press enter. You don't have to do that. So, but yeah, I do highly recommend going on archive.org, and if not the Computist, just look for any old computer magazines, 80s, 90s. And it's like that content of that type just doesn't exist anymore. And if you really want to have a lot of fun, get some magazines that go with a particular old computer, like an Apple II or
like an Amiga. Like Amiga magazines had their Amiga-specific nonsense that was always real fun.
And then get yourself an emulator for that old computer and do the stuff in the magazines, you can actually have a really fun time that way. I might, in fact, do that. So
I could finally play. I've never messed with an Amiga in my life, actually.
me either. I've seen one. That's it.